Welcome to Front Office Pros. Today, we're going to be talking about 6 must-draft sleepers for your fantasy football drafts.
Hike!
All right, Joe. So for the folks at home who are tuning into this episode, what's your first sleeper that you're recommending they should go get?
Yeah, I'm going to start off at the wide receiver position and go with Jackson Smith-Njigba, wide receiver, Seattle Seahawks, and his current value is sitting at $6, and I think that's just extremely low. I know he was, a disappointing rookie season, but I think he's really going to turn it around in this sophomore season. They got Ben Grubbs over from the University of Washington to be the offensive coordinator, and I think with this new system that they've got, I think it fits Jackson Smith-Njigba really well. And, with Tyler Lockett, he's not getting any younger. And at his current age, and ability to stay on the field, if he were to go down, that would really open the door for Jackson Smith-Njigba. But even so, I think he's got a chance to jump into that wide receiver 2 role for this Seattle Seahawks offense. And, of late, him and Geno Smith really seem to be building some nice chemistry as well. And I know Tyler Lockett led the way in targets last year, but I'm expecting that to change. Even as a disappointing rookie last year, Jackson Smith-Njigba was still at 93 targets, 620 yards and 4 touchdowns on 63 receptions as well. So I think he's going to rebound and have a good sophomore year here.
Yeah, I have Jackson Smith-Njigba being the second fiddle behind DK. Lockett being the third guy. So I do have JSN doing a little bit better than what he was before. I have him getting 78 catches. So basically another 15 catches and 866 yards for 5 touchdowns. So a little bit more of a bump than what he was last year. I just think, I honestly, it's music to my ears that you're saying this, Joe, because I have JSN and there's part of me that's slightly concerned that he never may materialize into the player we thought he would be based on his prospect status.
Yeah, I think if he doesn't turn it on this year and we don't see an improvement this year, that I'm expecting to see, and I know others out there are expecting to see another jump as well. If that doesn't happen, I'd be more concerned, for the future for you. But I truly do think in his sophomore year here, he's going to rebound and have a better season.
So my first sleeper that I'm going to recommend you go get is wide receiver Terry McLaurin. Terry McLaurin is a guy who basically I think is going from rags to riches. I mean, he really has had a desolate quarterback situation over our nation capital for quite some time, John. I did not play Scrabble today. That's just in my vocabulary.
Maybe you should have.
I know. It would have got some good points for that. But nevertheless, I think with McLaurin, I think now having Jayden Daniels as the quarterback, I think is going to be really, really good for the guy. I mean, he's had over 75 receptions and 1,000 yards over the past 4 seasons. I'm not counting his rookie year. He was very close to that. For him to be that productive with, in my view, a void at quarterback is pretty remarkable. So now you got a guy like Jayden Daniels who's coming in who, I think is a, much more accurate passer than what he's had to deal with. Plus, he can make things happen with his legs. So as a result, if he is looking downfield, you have that ability to be able to possibly, juke out the defense, if you will. So I think when it comes to McLaurin, at $11, I think it's a great value because, we're hearing about this in press conferences right now. They keep asking, head coach Dan Quinn, who's the wide receiver 2? Dotson isn't really emerging. They've got Dyami Brown. They've got Luke McCaffrey, but it's really McLaurin. McLaurin is the only guy. He's the guy. So to me, it's like, okay, if he's been getting 75 receptions and 1,000 yards and and about 4 or 5 touchdowns over the past 4 seasons, what is he going to do as the number 1 guy with Jayden Daniels? I think he could get hyper targeted.
Yeah, and it definitely seems like that watching these preseason games as well. Terry McLaurin's a guy I've been rising on. Haven't been the biggest, Terry McLaurin guy over the years, but I feel that this year just feels different. Like you said, they're not even sure who the wide receiver 2 is. I've been a Jahan Dotson fan, but it's tough to believe in him right now, and it very well could be Dyami Brown, but they don't. Sam Howell last year liked to spread the ball around. I'm not so sure Jayden Daniels is that type of quarterback, but I know when on these third downs, he's looking for Terry McLaurin, and it's been evident. And him and McLaurin seem to have a decent connection. And for $11, like you mentioned, that's a great value.
Are you enjoying this episode so far? Well, if you are, subscribe to our YouTube channel, smash that like button, and hit the notification bell for upcoming videos. We do videos throughout the year, so you're not going to want to miss what we have in store. All right, Joe. So who is your second sleeper that you're identifying here?
Yeah, I'm going to go over to the running back position for my second sleeper, and I'm going to go with running back Jerome Ford. And his value sitting at $5 right now. I think people are scared to draft Jerome Ford just because they're excited about Nick Chubb and the return of Nick Chubb. But I still think, Nick Chubb's probably at least 4 to 6 games away from playing this season. I don't think he plays, week 1 like the Browns had originally kind of hoped. So I think 4 to 6 weeks he comes in. And even when Chubb gets back, there's no guarantee that Chubb is just the Chubb that we'd seen before. We've seen, with these gruesome knee injuries, a lot of times year 2 after a surgery like that, these players get better. In year 1, it's kind of a struggle. So even when Chubb does come back, I still like Jerome Ford. And I mean, he had 204 carries last year. He did only have 4 touchdowns, but he had 813 yards rushing, averaged 4 yards a carry. And then he also did some work in the passing game as well with 63 targets, 44 receptions, and 5 receiving touchdowns, which shows he can catch the ball. So he's that dual threat running back. And for right now, going for $5, I think you can do a lot worse than Jerome Ford.
Yeah, this one's a struggle for me. I see your thought process. I really do. And I'm almost there, but I just can't get there. I think I'm not really worried about Chubb. I think Chubb, like you said, it was a gruesome knee injury. I was going to, describe it the same way you did. And when it comes down to it, it's like when he comes back, how do we know if he'll really be his former self? I'm not so sure, right? It's
Right.
really nice that the team is sticking by him. They could have. I mean, many teams may have even just decided to cut him and move on after something like that, but they're sticking by the player. I actually am a little concerned about D'Onta Foreman, to be honest with you. I could see this running back backfield being kind of a committee approach with D'Onta Foreman, Jerome Ford, and then Nick Chubb coming back. So, I mean, if he is the lead dog, for the Browns, then I would say, hey, that's a great opportunity for Jerome Ford. Although I do think the offense might be shifting. I think that, they brought in Jerry Jeudy. They got a guy like Cedric Tillman, former, receiver that they drafted out of Baylor, who I think they felt like he had a lot of promise. They've got Elijah Moore. They got Amari Cooper. They got David Njoku. I think they really want to see what they have in Deshaun Watson. And I think they may really air it out more than they have in years past. And if he's not able to stay healthy, we know Jameis Winston has done the same as well. I mean, he's chucked it all over the yard when he's been the starter in previous stints. So I hear what you're saying. And for $5, it's not bad. They say, hey, I'm going to throw him on my bench and hopefully something happens.
Right.
But, I can't get there with you on this one.
Yeah, Foreman definitely is a bit of a concern, but he's already shown he's got the health injuries. He was banged up not too long ago in training camp there. And I don't know if they like him. I mean, they didn't bring back Kareem Hunt. He's gone. So I don't know if they like D'Onta Foreman as much as they did, Kareem Hunt, which is why Ford didn't score more rushing touchdowns last year either. But with Joe Flacco, they really started to throw the ball more and not run it so much. I think once they see, Watson continue to pass, I think they're going to want to run the ball more.
So why don't I talk about a running back since you talked about a running back? So my other sleeper here is going to be running back Zamir White. He's only going for $9 with the Las Vegas Raiders. I got to tell you, Joe, I'm a little surprised by that. I'm wondering if that number is going to change as we get closer to drafts. When he took over as the full-time starter for the Las Vegas Raiders, when Josh Jacobs was kind of eased out of the offense at that point in time, he had 84 rushing attempts, which was tied with Najee Harris for the most rushing attempts over those 4 weeks. And not to mention, he had almost 400 yards rushing, which was basically in the top 5. So when you saw this guy having that type of volume, if you extrapolate that to where he's getting that over a 17-game season, watch out. He's going to be getting a lot of volume. So I think just even based on Antonio Pierce's style of play with Gardner Minshew now as a quarterback, I think they're going to play a lot of ground and pound. They're going to try to, rough him up with Max Crosby and Christian Wilkins on that defensive line. And I don't think that, Pierce doesn't mind winning ugly. I think that, they may, it's not out of the question that I think Zamir White could lead the league in rushing attempts this year.
Wow, that's a strong statement there.
I might have to save that for bold predictions coming up.
Yeah, you might want to. I mean, that's pretty bold, but I think it's fair. I mean, he's also a bigger, thicker style of back, I think, that could handle a workload like that. And like you mentioned, with Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell, if he gets a chance to enter the mix, I don't think with those quarterbacks they're going to want to have those guys passing a ton. So Antonio Pierce being a defensive guy, typically they like to go with the ground game kind of control and just run the ball, manage the clock. They're not about like a quick pace offense that's kind of counterintuitive to, you want to keep defenses on the field and kind of grind things out. And like you said, I agree. Antonio Pierce isn't a guy that's afraid to win games ugly. Things don't have to be pretty and score a bunch of points.
No, he doesn't care. If it's, what was it the game last year? Didn't the Raiders, it was like 0-0. Was it against the Vikings, I want to say?
Yeah.
It was a really ugly game. I can't remember. Did the Raiders win that game? I can't even remember.
I think they did. I believe they did, but I don't remember for sure. I don't want to hold that.
I know the Vikings won. Vikings won so many games. I don't know if it was the past season or the one before where they won so many games, by the skin of their teeth, more than anybody else. But I think it was 2 years ago because that's when Daniel Jones
2 years ago
the playoffs. Yeah, that's what it was. Anyways, but we're talking about present here, Joe, in the future. We're not talking about history. So, who is your next future sleeper? Your final one?
Yeah. So my final sleeper here, I'm going to go with Steve, is going to be quarterback Bo Nix and
Homer.
I had a feeling that was coming, so I gave you your time for the pause in there. Currently going for $1, man. This is a guy you can draft right at the end of your drafts, with your last dollar. And look, I know it's preseason. I know he hasn't gone against the first team defense, but for what it's worth, and through 2 games, he's 23 of 30 for 205 yards, 2 touchdowns, also 29 rushing yards. And this guy, he's sneaky athletic. I feel like people don't talk about it enough. I think he's got can provide you some rushing stats. I know that's the new thing for the NFL and fantasy. You want a guy that can run. Bo Nix, he can scramble around. He also can play from the pocket, which I think fits great in Sean Payton's offense. And we've seen a guy like Drew Brees. He didn't even scramble. He was a top fantasy quarterback year in, year out. And I'm not going to say already Bo Nix is Drew Brees by any stretch of the imagination here. But I think there's also been possibilities for Bo Nix to have 2 touchdowns in each game for a total of 4 over these games. We saw Javonte Williams. He was just over the line of scrimmage. Then in the first game, he threw an absolute dime to Josh Reynolds, mistimed his jump, which would have been like a 25-yard touchdown. But I think Bo Nix, I think he could surprise some people, and you can take $1 on him, and he might, he might not get to the quarterback. He probably won't be a QB1 for you, but I think he'll surprise and be mid-range QB.
Joe's riding high, just like other Broncos country in Mile High, as far as what's going on with Bo Nix here.
See, I'm not trying to go crazy, man. It's just trying to temper expectations, but it has been encouraging. He's running Sean Payton's offense the way it should be, and that's refreshing compared to, Russell Wilson having to go with the wristband and
you have to slander Russell Wilson here. We're talking about Bo Nix. We're not talking about the past. We're talking about the present.
Fair enough.
Get that he's in your he's a history.
He's in my rearview mirror.
Doesn't seem like it.
Deal with him.
Yeah, right. Here's the thing. I just, in my view, I just can't. I mean, I don't think he's going to be drafted very often, unless you're in a Broncos fan league. Basically, I don't see him being drafted. So why not use him as a streamer? Why use one of your bench spots to take him? I mean, I think he'll be out there unless you really think he's going to, have this. Huge beginning of the season. He's going to be a huge waiver wire pickup. You can't keep him on your roster. I just feel like if you're going to play that quarterback roulette game and stream, I feel like he's going to be a good streamer. I just don't see why I'd want to hold a bench spot for him.
That could make sense. I guess if you're in a super flex league, you might want to take him.
Yeah,
Be your
that would make more sense.
QB3. Uh, but even so, also if you play in if you're in a keeper league, I think he's worth drafting for $1. But you're probably not wrong. If you're not in a keeper league or a super flex, you probably could just ride the streamers and you wouldn't have to take the chance on $1.
So my final sleeper is going to be wide receiver Deontay Johnson of the Carolina Panthers. He's $7 right now, and he got traded from the Pittsburgh Steelers. He's now heading over to the Panthers. We've talked about this guy a little bit, Joe. Dave Canales has been saying that from what we've been hearing that, hey, Deontay, he's able to get open, and we anticipate that he's going to get the ball quite a bit. So I know Adam Thielen did what he did last year, which was very surprising. We did not expect that. Ended up getting 137 targets, over 1,000 yards, and 4 touchdowns, and with 103 catches. And so even with Bryce Young having as bad as year as he did, he still supported Adam Thielen, who was a borderline, he's basically a wide receiver 2, almost wide receiver 1, I want to say, off the top of my head. So I think with now Deontay Johnson coming in, I think he now becomes a more younger, nothing against Adam Thielen. I just think that he's going to bring some juice to this offense. Deontay, we've seen him do really well back in the days with Ben Roethlisberger. We saw some really, really good stats from him. So I like Deontay Johnson. I think for $7, he's certainly worth the flyer. And I think that offense in general, Dave Canales has done such a good job in his stints in Seattle and Tampa Bay with Geno Smith, who people, said that this guy was a bust. Whatever he was able to do in Seattle is remarkable. Same thing with Baker. So I expect that Bryce Young is going to be better this year. And as a result, I think that Deontay Johnson is going to be quite supported by him.
Got to tell you, Steve, it sounds so weird to hear you say positive things about Deontay Johnson. Obviously, if you've been following along with us last couple of years, I've been a heavy Deontay Johnson supporter, and Steve has not, because he's preferred the big play, flashy guy of George Pickens, where I always told you I would take that PPR volume out of Deontay Johnson, time and time again. And here we are. You don't got to convince me on Deontay Johnson, and the fact that I could get him for $7 on a new team with the Panthers, and he walks into the situation, in my eyes, being the wide receiver 1. I don't think, Thielen will be the one. I think he's a fine wide receiver 2 for the Panthers here. And like you mentioned, with Dave Canales coming over, I think Bryce Young should rebound this year.
I do think Xavier Legette is interesting, and he has shown some flashes. But, we've already seen him start to deal with some durability concerns heading into the season. And he's more of your big play type of receiver that I typically like. But he's a rookie. We don't know what the rapport is between Bryce Young and Xavier Legette. So I'm going to rely more on I'm going to rely more on Deontay Johnson because he's reprising the Thielen role, which I think will help with Bryce Young. Because he said, I think I heard him say, Dave Canales wants the ball out of his hands in like 2.5 seconds. Well, who's the best person to do that? Deontay, without a question.
Yeah, he's such a crisp route runner. He always gets open. The only neck that you've alluded to, Steve, is whether or not he's going to hold on to it and catch it.
Exactly. That's his biggest issue.
Yeah.
So that does it for our 6 sleepers that you must draft if you want to win your leagues. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't had a chance yet, go ahead and check out one of our most recent episodes where we talk about cheap versus expensive. We talked about Deontay Johnson or somebody else. And would you rather have cheap and Deontay or the expensive version? You're going to want to check that out. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time.